The U.S. Attorney in D.C. issued a criminal subpoena to Fed Chair Jerome Powell.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about his video for a second. I mean, that was really something.
The case itself seems about as strong as the case that the same U.S. attorney brought against the man who threw the sandwich at the Customs and Border official.
The killing of Renee Good continues to roil Minnesota and the nation.
Normally, when you have state and local officials and they want to be part of an investigation with a shooting like this by an officer, they get to participate. No, this time the feds are blocking out the state and local people, and they have made it clear that they're not interested in doing a civil rights investigation.
The whole idea of state power being lawfully given to officers like this is that there is a system for holding them accountable if something goes wrong.
Could Trump manipulate the 2026 election?
So first of all, there's all the gerrymandering. And then watch out, there's a Supreme Court decision that could gut the Voting Rights Act.
When the ballot is threatened, people come out to vote. Hello and welcome to Slate Political Gabfest. January 15th, 2026, the Can Trump Cow Powell edition. Try to say Cow Powell twice. I am David Plotz of CityCast here in Washington, D.C. from New Haven, Connecticut, her home in New Haven, Connecticut, and the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School. It's Emily Bazelon. Hello, Emily.
Hey, David. Hey, John.
And from New York City, where he is the host of a lively internal dialogue about Chester Arthur, John Dickerson.
That was very funny. Hi.
This week on the Gabfest, Trump goes nuclear on Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Will it backfire? Then what's happening in Minnesota, the just deplorable and depressing developments in the Renee Good killing and the ICE invasion of the Twin Cities. Ooh, God, that is just dark. Then could Trump manipulate the 2026 election? We'll talk about all the various ways in which trust in elections, trust in voting is being undermined and challenged by different people, but notably by the president. Plus, we will have cocktail chatter. And of course, we've got a live show coming up for you on February 11th, Wednesday at 7:30 here in Washington, D.C. at 6th and I. We've still got tickets left for this show as part of our 20th anniversary tour. We have a great guest we're almost ready to announce, I believe. It's going to be really fun on Wednesday night, February 11th. Go to slate.com/gabfestlive DC for tickets. Please come join us there. The U.S. Attorney in D.C., here in D.C., Jeanine Pirro, issued a criminal subpoena to Fed Chair Jerome Powell, part of a investigation of whether Powell misled Congress about cost overruns in the renovation, the rebuilding of the Fed building. Powell has responded to this threat with a video calling the investigation a pretext and an attempt to bully and intimidate the Fed to pursue policies that the president wants rather than policies that are in the public interest as defined by the statute that creates the Fed and as the Fed has pursued for decades. This threat has had strangely little impact on the markets, which continue to seem to think that unlike with virtually every other institution that Trump runs, that Trump intimidates, not that Trump runs, that Trump actually lacks the power to ruin the Fed's independence because that independence is effectively protected by the force of the markets, that any president that tried to destroy that independence would see such a negative response in the markets that they couldn't do it. And therefore, even though this is a blatant attempt to, in fact, intimidate and change Fed policy, the markets are acting as though it isn't because it couldn't work. It's a really weird kind of mental paradox that I'm interested in unpacking. And it should be noted, I mean, I'm going to play the role of John Dickerson here, that this kind of effort to bully a Fed chair goes far, far beyond anything that's ever happened in American history. And it's unprecedented and shocking.
Bullying,
it is.
Okay. Trying to but threatening them with grand jury subpoenas, criminal indictment.
It goes far beyond.
That's what he's saying.
That's what I said. I just said that.
Wait a minute, David.
You.
Are you saying your name is David?
That you were wrong, and that this particular statement.
No.
Okay. So
God. Maybe you could listen to what I was saying.
I'm listening. I was doubting. I was listening and doubting.
So,
Go.
John.
Oh my
so
God.
let's start with the why Trump is doing this? What does it seem that Trump is? Of course, Trump denies that he's doing. He says, "Oh, I don't know anything about this," but it's pretty clear that this is something that his people are doing because they perceive it to be something that he wants. Why do they want to do this nominally?
That's what the Wall Street Journal editorial page called "lawfare for dummies," which is, we've said it many times, but who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? So one of the things we've talked about is with Donald Trump creating a market for behavior that is totally outside of the norm, and people compete in that market for his affection or for stature within the Make America Great Again movement. And he doesn't even have to ask for it. They're just, trying to achieve those two goals. So whether he asked for it or not, it is in line with what he wants. And there are at least two reasons. There may be several others that are more inside and smarter. But one is that the president would like rates to be lower because the economy is not doing as well as he actually says it's doing, or it's not actually doing as well as he says it's doing. And the second thing is it's just a show to try to come up with some argument for why the economy is not doing well. Affordability is the number one issue voters talk about. They blame the president not just for not attending to the issue, but for making it worse. And this is an attempt to say there's some other villain here. That's not a new story in terms of the president has often found scapegoats for things when they didn't go his way. So that could be two reasons. The pretextual reason is that supposedly Powell misled Congress when he talked about whether there was a roof garden and a VIP elevator and whether a certain kind of white Danby marble was being purchased. White Danby marble is that white marble that looks like it's got ash sort of strewn through it. And the fact of the case is that there were cost overruns basically because there was a bunch of asbestos removal that was required. They have to sink the building lower because of DC's height requirements. And so there are reasons there was a cost overrun. And also Powell, with respect to this quote unquote misstatement, he clarified what he was saying before anybody started messing with him about it a week after this testimony. So the case itself it seems about as strong as the case that the same U.S. attorney brought against the man who threw the sandwich at the Customs and Border official.
Just to stay with you for a second, John, the theory, so Trump does want interest rates lowered, but the Fed is not lowering interest rates as quickly as he wants because the Fed believes, because they have many, many smart economists who work there and people with a lot of experience, they believe that if they lower rates much faster, there will be a much more likelihood of high inflation, which is something that I don't think Trump wants at all. In some sense, they are trying to protect the economy because they don't want to bring back a surge of inflation. They
protect him from himself.
And protecting him from himself. Why do you think the administration doesn't recognize that? Or is it just Trump's will to power is such that he wants to control everything and therefore control this, and he's like, his whim is that he believes that interest rates should be lower?
I think it's three things maybe. One, his whim is that they should be lower because he believes he knows the way the economy really works better than the Fed does. And by the way, the Fed had some big misses on inflation. So the Fed is not infallible. Second, you saw this week when the president spoke at a auto manufacturing plant that when a man on the shop floor called him a pedophile protector, he gave the guy the finger. I think this might be also in keeping with that same kind of response. Powell has been resisting the president on a number of things, and this is a kind of or his many, many negative comments about Powell. And so I'd lump this in as well as a version of doing the same thing with Powell. But you're right about the concerns about inflation, which are not just the normal concerns about inflation when there's too much money in the system, but also because you have tariffs creating inflationary pressures and the belief among economists still that the reason that tariffs haven't boomed inflation is that basically companies have been sucking up the costs. And that ultimately companies won't be able to keep taking the costs of those import taxes that they have to pay, and they're going to start passing them on to consumers. Also, the Fed has this other mandate, which is to keep unemployment low, and they're concerned that unemployment is getting worse as the job picture has been weak.
On tariffs, I think a lot of us thought that the Supreme Court was going to issue its opinion this week, its ruling in that case, and the court did not. So all bets are off on the timing of that now. I mean, isn't there also possibly for Trump just that he's kind of flailing and bullying inchoately, or that there's this kind of longer term agenda, which is to intimidate and cow the Fed going forward? You know, the more time passes, the more he does have appointments that are coming up. He gets to appoint a new chair. You're giving whoever that person will be a really clear message. Maybe you're persuading Jerome Powell to get the hell off this body, because who needs this anymore when his term continues to 2028? Maybe not. Maybe he stays. But the over the longer term, the more kind of, threat of indictment getting torn up in this machine of MAGA that people endure in public service, the less likely you have good people in public service. And that serves Trump's ends.
I was really struck by there was this notion that some Republican senators, and these were perceived as sort of the compromising, moderate Republican senators, were going to propose a compromise to Powell, which was, we'll stop the investigation if you resign. It's like, wait, how is that a compromise? It's basically like, this is the racket. This is the mobster behavior. So it's like, just do what we want and you won't get hurt. It's outrageous to notion to like that is the Senate. I understand Trump saying that. I mean, that's Trump's method. But for the senators to be like, oh, we are finding a reasonable compromise. The reasonable compromise is you quit your job and this pretextual investigation won't go forward. Seems an embarrassment.
In fact, Senator Kevin Cramer of the junior senator of North Dakota was on CNBC and basically said, it would be an elegant thing for Powell to step down in the light of this investigation. And the CNBC anchor said, wait a minute, you think it would be elegant for the Fed chair under the threat of indictment to step down? That doesn't sound elegant. And Cramer said, oh, well, then you disagree. Like, in other words, there's no fight over whether that was precisely what they wanted, which is to use the indictment as a way to shove him out. Now, there are other senators. Senator Tillis is one, a retiring senator from North Carolina, is saying, I'm not going to vote on any Trump nominees until you drop this case.
And then only Lisa Murkowski fully backed him up. It wasn't like 5 or 10 or 100%. I mean, right? It still feels
Although
like
that could still, one senator can block it.
Right, true.
But to your point, Emily, finish your point.
No, just that you don't see a kind of mass consensus rejection that you would need to really change the behavior.
But I guess what interests me is your sense about whether this is intrinsically a self-destructive action on Trump's part. So it's backfired in the sense that it's raised the hackles of Tom Tillis, who can stop a confirmation hearing of a Powell replacement or another nominee. It has made Powell more determined to stay on, one would presume. Based on this video, he certainly did not seem to be cowed by what was happening.
Let's talk about his video for a second. I mean, that was really something. Like, this is this 72-year-old patrician conservative Republican standing there in a video making this a moment, right? Saying like, this is not okay. I thought that was actually quite important and impressive.
Yes, it's the Oracle of Delphi comes down off the mountain and is like twerking on Bourbon Street. I mean, that's like, you don't expect a Fed chairman to be issuing video statements, and you definitely don't expect them to be as blunt as his, which is basically, this is a sham because I'm not doing what the president wants. Like, his job is to couch things in careful language, and he was as blunt as can be.
I mean, David, in answer to your question about whether it backfires or not, I mean, always with Trump, like, in some ways, obviously it's backfiring. His approval ratings are low. He seems to be, flailing all over the place. We can all see that. On the other hand, he still gets some of the things he wants along the way. And because he has no shame and in a lot of ways just throws spaghetti at the wall, it's always hard for me to answer this question, because I feel like you can see some costs and then you can also see some gains potentially.
I think, as you rightly pointed, David, the market has been the one thing where reality bites, where gravity asserts itself. And when the president has done things that the market thinks are crazy, it reacts, and then he changes his mind. We saw that a good deal with respect to tariffs, and at one, for a little while, people were talking about the taco idea, that he always caves when the heat gets hot. In this case, remember when everybody used to say, like, the smart thing to say was, well, the market's already priced in that event, right? Well, I mean, I think they have priced in the crazy, and they've priced in the announcement fatigue, which is the president says a bunch of stuff and it never really happens. So much is this the case that when the president was asked about his $2,000 rebate that he was going to give Americans, this is the one where the tariff income that the Americans are paying, they're going to get back in the form of a tax rebate, which makes no sense. But nevertheless, he had talked about it several times.
Extremely efficient mechanism you've outlined.
He was asked about it in the New York Times interview, and it was a surprise to him that he had announced it. I mean, in other words, the number of things that he says he's going to do are so numerous and so lightly attached to reality, even as he understands it, that he is now forgetting the things that he's winged out there.
Well, but he's forgetting that, yes, that's true. But, there is still a criminal subpoena of Jerome Powell out there.
Although the U.S. attorney sort of in D.C., Janine Pirro, kind of walked it back a little bit. Like, oh, this was a misunderstanding. They didn't call us back. I mean, it was ridiculous, but interesting that she was sort of fuzzing it up. I know. I mean, that's what she said.
Yeah, but there still will be there will be a new Fed chair who will be nominated. One of the Kevins will be nominated to be a Fed chair, and that whoever is nominated is then going to face a gauntlet of questioning. And it's going to be very interesting because either this is a person who, once they are installed in this independent office, are at the serving at the beck and call of Trump and will do what he proposes, or they're going, if they, depending on who what their personality is, they will feel some sense of resistance, and so this sense of what Fed policy will be is kind of up in the air. So I think the fact that Trump may have reeled back, or that the criminal subpoena will not be issued, does not change the fact that there is now a massive amount of scrutiny, and this question is still quite open about the real world impact of trying to intimidate Powell. There will still be a real world impact even if Powell is never criminally prosecuted.
Right. And the question then is whether the new people that are on the Fed, when Trump gets as many of his folks in there as possible. And by the way, we shouldn't forget, and we can talk about this in the Minneapolis topic, but the original point, David, is quite the right one, which is that on the continuum of imperial power in the executive, this is not even, to talk about this as a part of the continuum of the executive is wrong. We are in a fresh new timeline here when you use the power of the judiciary to attack independent statutory officers. But anyway, whoever the new person is, maybe he doesn't go down to 1%, which is what Trump wants interest rates at, but he drops them a little. On the other hand, anybody in that job, so Trump will be out of office at some day, and that person in that job doesn't have the political pressure the way a senator who wants to get reelected does. So you could imagine somebody who wants to have a future in economics of any sort would possibly be constrained a little bit by market reactions, and might be on the more aggressive side of reducing rates, but not go wacky.
I wonder if I wish we had thought to have an economist on to talk about this, but everyone loves a low interest rate, really. Like, people like a low interest rate. It's so appealing. You can get a great mortgage rate. If you want to start a business, it's much cheaper to start a business. If you want to take out a huge loan to do a real estate deal, it is very easy to take out a huge loan to do a real estate deal if you're Donald Trump. And I suspect that a lot of what Trump sees in the question of interest rates really is his experience as a developer, where low interest rate environment means development is so much easier. It's so much more lubricated. And, a lot of people don't understand why interest rates aren't always very low. They would like them to always be very low. And of course, the reason why interest rates aren't always very low is that, like, too much sloshing, too much investment that isn't justified in the system is what leads to inflation. It leads to kind of investing in the wrong sorts of things. If there isn't, you need higher interest rates to discipline the economy in some sense. And I don't know, Trump probably doesn't feel that way.
Just one final thought is, think about this. Powell now goes into the long list of institutions. And I mean, he already was in this list, but when you think about the universities, the law firms, CBS News, all of the different officials that have been Intel, NVIDIA, that have been where Trump has used these tactics, the list gets quite long.
The killing of Renee Good continues to roil Minnesota and the nation. Good, who was shot by an ICE agent as she drove away from an ICE operation last week, was smeared almost immediately as a, quote, domestic terrorist by multiple officials in the Trump administration and in the Republican Party. The administration has taken the investigation out of the hands of local officials, seems to be pursuing an investigation of Good's wife, are trying to pursue potentially some sorts of terrorism-related charges or sinister charges against organizations that are resisting ISIS efforts in the Twin Cities, but showing absolutely no effort to hold the officer who shot Good accountable or to investigate whether the officer should be held accountable for for what he did. They've also surged thousands more federal agents into the state, or will soon, in an effort to harry and intimidate and immiserate the immigrant community, especially the Somali immigrants who are at the center of this fraud scandal that has obsessed the MAGA conservative influencer world. Meanwhile, a bunch of DOJ officials have taken early retirement or resigned rather than participate in what they perceive to be a sham and a misguided investigation that is not going after the right parts of what's gone wrong here. And there was another shooting last night, incidentally. There was another person shot by an ICE agent as the chaos in Minnesota and the Twin Cities increases. So, Emily, I mean, this is just like a bad moment. This is a very dangerous moment. We have a massed, angry, violent, occupying federal and set of agents in the United States in cities who are treating the civilian population as an enemy.
Yes, and we have a president who is, stoking the flames and sort of deliberately setting up provocations. While we've been taping, Trump posted on True Social that if the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law, blah, blah, he's going to invoke the Insurrection Act. And he's claiming that many presidents have done this before, which, of course, is not true in any way that's relevant to this situation. This is a total tinderbox, and it's also just really sad the way in which the Justice Department is being distorted so that an investigation that would normally take place is just happening in a completely different way, right? So like normally when you have state and local officials and they want to be part of an investigation with a shooting like this by an officer, they get to participate. Everybody works together. No, this time the feds are blocking out the state and local people, and they have made it clear that they're not interested in doing a civil rights investigation, which is when you look at whether the officer used force unreasonably in a way that would violate the Constitution. Instead, they're doing what looks like partial investigation into whether there was an assault on the officer, right? And yeah, the FBI agents who pursue that investigation can still look at all the evidence and try to look at this in a more comprehensive way. But the message very clearly from all the public statements and also just like pressure from the White House and Justice Department officials is to not do that. It's instead, as the New York Times reported this week, to start looking at Renee Good's wife and the local activist groups. And that is both like a total distraction from what looks like the real harm and menace here. Also, it has all kinds of like free speech implications. And finally, it's just not justice in the way that we at all would want or think of in a case like this. And, it's really disturbing.
It's the fact that the president is threatening the Insurrection Act. If the state officials don't do what they're supposed to do, completely turns on its head what he's doing in the context of the officer who shot Renee Good, which is to say that basically I'm going to invalidate state power to investigate the shooting by doing two things. One, denying the evidence to the state officials trying to investigate it, but then also preemptively exonerating the officer. The whole idea of state power being lawfully given to officers like this is that there is a system for holding them accountable if something goes wrong. That's what makes them different than just a vigilante, is that they have a set of rules that they're supposed to follow. And those rules are dictated by the Constitution to which they swear, not loyalty to the president. And if you're trying to figure out what's going on here, that continuum where you have authority granted by statute in the Constitution that allows state power to operate is basically being invalidated by the president and his attorney general and by DHS, who are saying the only thing you need to know about this case is that he was acting under the president's orders and therefore he is exonerated, which gives an incredible signal to anybody who is acting on the ground in Minneapolis right now, and which basically says if you're doing what the president wants, you're good.
Yeah, you go back, sorry, John, you go back again and again and again to the metaphor that Trump once used about himself, which he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. And it's like, I don't know what street that Renee Good was shot on, and Trump didn't do the shooting, but Trump, it is that color of Trump doing it. I mean, that is literally what we've come to, is here's a citizen, maybe not exactly minding her business, maybe not doing exactly what the federal officials wanted at that moment, but a citizen just behaving in a more or less normal way, who is murdered in cold blood. And as you say,
and you don't even have to think that Renee Good was acting correctly. Perhaps in the end, it could be found that Renee Good was doing things wrong and the officer was in the right. Okay, but you need to prove that through the court of law so that the officer is legitimate in a system where it's not just like I do whatever the king says, but a system where legitimacy is conferred and earned through a system of accountability and a system of laws. And by the way, that whole accountability is what keeps people from disobeying in the first place, because they hopefully think that the whole system isn't a complete lawless mess.
Right. I mean, when you think about what you need for a community in a moment like this, it's trust that there's going to be a full investigation, that we're going to get to the bottom of this. And even if you don't charge Jonathan Ross, this ICE officer, in the end, or he's not convicted, there's some sense that everyone can look at the evidence and figure out what happened. And yes, the videos are really important and, in a lot of ways show that, not in a lot of ways, they do show that Renee Good was turning her wheel away from this officer. But there are other things to consider. And now I think the idea that this is going to be a fully credible investigation that really looks at everything and is fact-based, it's just hard to believe in. And that is bad for everybody, right, in the end. But that's sort of where we're headed, is this foregone conclusion based on Trump and J.D. Vance and Kristi Noem's statements so far.
So much of what is unsettling me about what's going on has to do with the theater, which I do think it is intentionally theatrical, of ICE in the streets of American cities. And so you have officers who are masked. They're effectively anonymous. They're huge. They're heavily armed. And they're engaged in quite activities that are mysterious and quite alien and disturbing to somebody who's a civilian. I live in Washington, D.C., and the presence of the National Guard in Washington, D.C., truthfully, has not been that has not been particularly upsetting. It isn't upsetting to see National Guard troops. It's weird to see National Guard troops on the streets of Washington walking around and having weapons. And
yeah, you think, where is the parade?
But it's not disturbing because they're not, because they you see their faces, they interact with the public. It's not calming exactly, but it's not upsetting. But ICE is the opposite, and also the way the kind of nature of the people who seem to be in ICE these days, and the way they're being taught to carry out their work is so militant and brutal, and it's so resentful of the civilian population that it's just awful. It's like an awful situation, and every day that it goes on, it just invites more and more and more disturbance. And sorry to keep rolling on about this, it's obviously unpopular. If you poll people, they do not like how brutal ICE is being in their neighborhoods. They don't. There's very few people who like it. But the people who do like it are fully in the president's camp, and they are a significant chunk of the base of the Republican Party. And the more violent ICE is, or the more intimidating ICE is, the more they like it. And that is a bad dynamic, because for popular protest and peaceful popular protest to work, you have to prick the conscience of the nation and of the leaders of a nation. And like, they have to feel there's enough pressure on them that they've got to stop doing something, because they've so lost the popular will and the heart of the people. And my worry is that there is fundamentally no heart to prick, no conscience to prick in the Trump administration these days, whereby any form of peaceful protest is going to get to them, because it's what's happening is just so disturbing to civilians. But if you don't really give a shit about that, you'll just keep doing it.
Well, isn't it so strange that everything you say, David, rings true, and yet Trump is also threatening to invade Iran because those protesters are getting killed? No, obviously, like, that is many more people, but it's the same dynamic of peaceful protest against the government. And, you know, he's like pretending to be on the side of the protesters in that context, whereas in our own country, where he actually has power, the dynamic is reversed.
Just to go back to your very initial point, David, you see in both the Powell and the Minneapolis cases, the president operating not on a continuum along the imperial presidency, which was essentially reacting, using war powers and executive orders. I mean, in the Powell case, he's overriding a statute and he's using one of his departments to do so. So it's not just the norms he's not upholding, but the norms he's destroying by actions he's taking. In Minneapolis, the president's basically redefining state power. And the redefinition is that anybody who uses power on behalf of the president is immediately exonerated of any wrongdoing because it's being done in the president's name, and therefore it can't be wrong. Like, those are two just brand new major breaches. So that's a federalism breach and a destruction of a branch of Congress, a branch of the federal government breach. And that's just in 1 week.
There's another thing that's really bothering me, since we're connecting these two, the Powell and the Minneapolis situations, which is the way in which it used to be, months ago, that thinking of opening a criminal investigation without enough facts was really disturbing, right? Like, I talked and wrote a lot about the idea that imposes its own costs, that even if you're never indicted or you're not convicted, you still have to worry a ton and hire lawyers and have your life affected. And I feel like there's a lot of rationalizing going on right now. And I feel it in myself, where you want to think all right, well, they're just sending Powell a grand jury subpoena, or they're just asking Renee Good's wife a bunch of questions. That's not as bad as actually charging or convicting them. But no, this is not how the power of federal law enforcement is supposed to work. And it's deeply important to hang on to that and not let the goalpost move.
Speaking of goalposts moving and allegiance only to a ruler and not statutes and laws, and I'm not talking about norms here, statutes and laws, we did just have the anniversary of January 6th, a case in which hundreds of police officers were injured and attacked, and in which Donald Trump reversed the polarity completely from the one he's applying to the case in Minneapolis. And what was the difference? Just that he wanted it differently.
And Emily, I just want to plus one so much your point that it actually doesn't really matter that juries will never convict Renee Good's wife if she's charged. That will never happen. No jury in Minnesota is going to convict her. It's just not going to happen, because juries have already shown they are quite resistant to what they perceive to be highly trumped up charges. But the sheer level of harassment, misery, cost, embarrassment that you can impose with an investigation is almost enough.
This is a grieving widow. There's just a sort of, can we just remember these are human beings? I mean, come on. Oh, yeah.
Emily, can you weigh in on how we should be thinking about Brett Kavanaugh in this context? Because in his, concurrent opinion, I can't remember, but in Noem versus Vasquez, he basically articulated a view of what these stops would be like if they came upon a person who was a U.S. citizen. And it was, as I recall, that it was basically would be a low key affair. It'd be like, oh, you're a U.S. citizen, cool. All right, we're moving on. And the reaction from those in the minority was like, no, this is going to lead to chaos, madness. And basically, it feels like to me what we're seeing in the streets of Minneapolis.
Yeah, I mean, I think people started calling these stops Kavanaugh stops as a way of shaming him. And then a few weeks ago, in another opinion, he kind of backed off and said, well, like, obviously, these stops are not supposed to turn into these hours long or, potentially violent altercations. Hey, guys, like, maybe giving you the benefit of the doubt and saying everything was going to be brief and copacetic was a mistake. I mean, he didn't say that explicitly, but it seemed like you could read into the subtext. And yeah, I think you're right. What's really important for courts right now, and lower courts continue to do a much better job of this generally than the Supreme Court, is to not give the government the benefit of the doubt in the way that it normally has. And I mean, we did have the Supreme Court, say in the different case about Trump using not the Insurrection Act, but another statute to commandeer the National Guard, like, wait a second, no, you can't do it that way. Now, of course, if he really does invoke the Insurrection Act, that will be calling the court's bluff. But it still remains really important for judges to be clear-eyed about the facts on the ground.
It did feel like Kavanaugh in that December footnote or whatever he added later was kind of like, the kid who comes in a day after the exam and goes, can I just add a little something onto the blue book? I mean, the Union was in the right in the Civil War.
The Trump administration continues to question the integrity of elections in a way that is unsettling election experts who think the 2026 midterms and then elections in the future could be undermined and unstable. So, Emily, do you want to start by walking us through the various different ways that Trump and Trump's allies are questioning the integrity of U.S. elections? And then I think there's also a separate issue, which is around gerrymandering and the kind of rigging of districts that both parties are doing, although I would say the Republicans have sort of been more aggressive about it, about rigging the electorate itself.
Yes, there is a really good piece in the Washington Post this week by Patrick Marley and Yvonne Sanchez that really lays out the different issues and potential threats going on. So first of all, there's all the gerrymandering, which we can talk more about. But, you have a group of Republican-controlled states, Ohio, Missouri, North Carolina, and Texas, that have already tried to make 9 districts more favorable. And then on the other side, the Democrats are trying to do that in California and then a couple of other states too. So that's all happening. And then watch out, there's a Supreme Court decision due probably this summer that could gut the Voting Rights Act in a way that could allow Republicans to really redraw districts that have elected the candidates of choice for Black and Latino voters in southern states like Alabama and Louisiana. And that could also really change the balance in the House. Then there's Trump's railing against mail voting, which is kind of self-defeating because lots of old people who tend to vote Republican like mail-in balloting, but he hasn't given in on that. So that's kind of hovering out there. He also continues to attack voting machines, and he tried to issue an executive order that would establish new standards for voting equipment. The problem is that you can't buy any machines that would actually meet the qualifications he laid out. So that's a problem. Then there is, and this I think is something that's actually happening, the Justice Department has asked 40 states for the list of all their registered voters. And some of what they've been doing with this information, because some of the states have turned it over, is handing it over to the Department of Homeland Security as, yet one more way of trying to enforce immigration laws. But it's also possible that they could try to do purges of the voting rolls. A bunch of states have refused to turn this information over. And so all of that is going to court. And then there's just the way he has stacked really important positions in the Justice Department with election deniers, right? So, there's Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, the people in charge of the Justice Department and the FBI. They have signed on to the idea that Biden rigged the presidential election. The head of the Civil Rights Division, Hermie Dillon, another one. And then there are people lower down too, like this woman, Heather Honey, the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Homeland Security Department, who worked on trying to, undermine Arizona's 2020 election. And now she's helping to oversee the whole election infrastructure for the country. So there's just like a bunch of disturbing indicators out there that it's just going to be harder to have a free and fair election in 2026 and especially in 2028. And the last thing that, I think you can kind of see happening right now in Minneapolis is that if we get used to having federal troops on the ground, ICE agents out on the streets, supposedly for immigration enforcement, or because there is this climate of, this tinderbox in a city, and then they are there when the balloting or before the balloting takes place, that's going to be trickier for courts to sort out whether they're there legitimately or not. There is a federal statute that makes it clear that you're not allowed to call in the troops around polling places in a way that could intimidate voters. But you could imagine some, confusion or pretext around whether they're there for another purpose, even though that could still affect who comes to the polls.
And this connects, of course, to your earlier point, David, which is when outrageous things are done, there should be some political consequence that constrains outrageous behavior. And when the laws aren't being followed and the courts aren't being listened to, which are the two normal checks of outrageous behavior, then the third, another one is, of course, at the ballot box. But if at the ballot box, you've made it so that you can be protected because you've done things outside the system, as the president did in 2020, that leaves no recourse for constraining an official or a party that overreaches.
John, there's this adage in politics, which is that when the ballot is threatened, people come out to vote. Do you think that anything that does it apply in these cases too, or is what Trump is doing sort of circumvent that, or is it tangential to that? And then, in fact, he may be hurting the vote without. People may be inspired to come out to vote, but what he's done will have made it harder or will have made it less trusted anyway.
Yeah, I love that you called that an adage, because I believe that for the last 20 years, I've been asserting that. But it is based on some
the John Dickerson adage.
Yes, it's based on political science research. I think for the African American community where voting rights have been threatened, that is where there's the most direct relationship. In other words, if your specific voting right, your ability to vote is being threatened, and obviously in the African American community, there's that long history. I don't know how this plays out. I mean, part of what our friend Nate Persley has pointed out many times, and in this context as well, is that even these executive orders about mail-in ballots and machines, even though the president's never going to get anywhere with them, he's just sowing doubt. So that when something happens, he can say, oh, it was the mail-in voting. As Emily says, troops are on the ground. And maybe there's a statute about you're not supposed to be close to voting booths, but statute's matchute. Stephen Miller is asserting that federal officers have total immunity in Minneapolis, which is not true. They're just asserting whatever they want. And if you're doing it in the case of life and death, you're going to do it with respect to an election. So I think that you could imagine all of this kind of joining into a great conglomeration of abuses that voters want to correct in the midterms, and you definitely see that in the generic polling where Democrats have an advantage. You see it traditionally and historically when a president's approval rating is under 50, his party loses big in the midterms. So I think it will hurt, but probably as a part of a peanut cluster of issues rather than that one-to-one relationship that I've asserted exists before.
I want to make a couple of other points in this. One is, another thing this effectively does is it makes being a local election official an increasingly thankless and miserable job. Who wants to do it? And that will make elections worse run. It will also probably ensure that the people who are in the mid and high ranks of election officials are kind of worse, and maybe some will be more easily swayed, and they just won't have the sort of backbone and fiber that would be required to resist efforts to alter or distort elections. So that's another issue. And another one is just, even if this doesn't change the number of people who vote, doesn't change the fact that ballots get counted, even if it doesn't change the outcome of any elections in 2026 or 2028, it generally erodes the sense that democracy works and that voting is effective and that voting is fair. Like, the more you sow doubt, the more people just become skeptical about voting as an activity, and they're suspicious of it. And that weakens the infrastructure of democracy, which is something that, Trump seems just utterly determined to continue doing. And that is the long-term consequence. Whether or not it has a short-term consequence in 2026 or 2028, I don't know. But in the long term, we have fewer and fewer people in this country who trust that elections work and are fair, and that the people who are serving as a result of those elections are there legitimately and should have the people should have popular confidence in them. And that's just a alarming position for our nation to be in.
Can I add one other thing? Is that the president recently, at a meeting with House Republicans, expressed sort of befuddlement as to why voters weren't giving him credit. And he also said, gee, if you guys lose the House, they're going to come investigate me. But he truly seemed, in this long 90-minute confusion round that he went through. He said, I wish you could explain to me what the hell is going on with the mind of the public. We've had the most successful first year of my president in history, and it should be a positive. Why do I point this out? Well, first of all, it was a 90-minute speech in which he was supposed to arm Republicans with a good message to counter the chief claim against him, which is that he hasn't done anything about prices, and in fact, he's made them worse. He continues to be unable to focus in a speech to address that issue, which is, of course, one of the great claims against him, which is that he hasn't focused. Nevertheless, his feeling that there must be some trickery out there to why I'm not being overwhelmingly lauded by the voters, he either actually believes that or it's also a pretext, which is it's so obvious that I'm incredibly popular and Republicans are doing all these great things. Therefore, any outcome that doesn't ratify that at the voting booth must be the subject of some craziness. And we know this isn't just conjecture. We know he did this in the 2020 election, where he claimed nobody voted for Joe Biden. And why would they? Right. So anyway, I just that quote is either a window into his mind or another way in which rhetorically he's trying to claim that any outcome that doesn't ratify him must be a fraudulent one.
Emily, can I ask one final question, which is slightly peninsular to this, out somewhere else, which is the census. That also in this Washington Post article, they mentioned that there's a talk of doing an early census. So what would an early census be? Is it legal? And why does Trump want to do that?
Well, Trump wants a census that doesn't count undocumented immigrants, because then you could change both the way you give money to cities, right? You would reduce it because there'd be fewer citizens, the fewer people who count in the census, mostly in cities. And then also you could change representation, right? Because if you people who are undocumented count for purposes of figuring out how many people should be in each House district or each state legislative district. So if you take them out, then you reduce the political clout of Democratic strongholds, just to be kind of generalizing about it. So that's the point. Also, just to send the message that undocumented immigrants are whatever, calling them second-class citizens from Trump's point of view is probably
second-class non-citizens.
Yeah,
they're not
don't
citizens.
count. Right. So that's the idea. I don't think it's legal. Also, the census is an enormous operation. You can't just decide to do the census. I mean, it's huge, takes years to set up, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't take this super seriously, and I really hope the courts wouldn't allow some seat of the pants census, but that's what he's talking about.
But it also helps, even if it doesn't work, as we were saying earlier, to suggest that undocumented immigrants are voting. Right. It allows that to. David, is a point that is peninsular different from a point that is orthogonal?
I think I had said the word tangential earlier in that segment. I was conscious that I said it, which would have been the word. And I was like, what's another word that implies it's out somewhere else?
Yeah.
I kind of like peninsular.
I loved it.
You could go with that.
I loved it. I'm going to steal it like corrugated, which is another one of your confections that really sang for me.
Let us go to cocktail chatter. Actually, John, you may not want to comment on this, John Dickerson, but a friend of mine sent me a picture of the new CBS News set, and apparently your successor has something called Whiskey Fridays, and I was like, they're stealing cocktail chatter. You don't even your silence can speak.
It had a big Jack Daniels ad on the
Oh, really?
set. I think, yes. Don't leave.
Why
that
don't we have
out.
a big Jack Daniels ad? Why can't
or
we? We've been doing
not an
cocktail
ad,
chatter.
why not just a big bottle of it?
Emily, what is your cocktail chatter? Not sponsored by Jack Daniels, but Jack Daniels, we're here. I'll give you my phone number if you want.
I'm going back to my preferred role as the person who no one would want to actually talk to at the cocktail party.
Or around whom one needs an extra cocktail.
Sorry, guys. So, there's this ongoing case in front of Judge Boasberg in D.C. about the Venezuelans who got deported to the terrible prison in El Salvador and suffered terribly, right? And these were these sudden deportations in March under the Alien Enemies Act, which is this wartime law. And these people got absolutely no due process. And it remains a kind of stain, I would argue. So the government is still arguing in court about 137 of these Venezuelans and whether there can be any kind of remedy for them. And the latest argument from Secretary of State Marco Rubio is no. Given the current negotiations with Venezuela's regime, now that we have snatched up Maduro, there's no way to retrieve them. There's no way to do anything for them because we've created this kind of diplomatic impasse that has made it impossible. So that's the latest in the upside down world.
Are they still in CCOT?
No.
They're in Venezuela, right?
They're in Venezuela, but right.
Swap.
Right. The question is, they got deported with zero due process. Is there any way to redress that part and see if some of them have claims that would allow them to seek asylum here? And Rubio's excuse for not doing that is the current state of Venezuela, which we created.
And Emily, isn't it still an open question of the issue of whether the government basically blew off Judge Boasberg's initial orders and basically said, you and your due process?
Yes, that you're right. That contempt investigation continues, I think.
Very, very slowly after being put on hold for 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, which connects to our previous point about, there may be a statute you can't have officers around a polling place, but that'll be figured out in 2029.
What is your chatter, John?
I made jokes about you can read it on the Substack, but it's true. I do have one. But the reaon I mentioned that,
people keep saying John's posting on Substack. I was like, all right, I got it.
Yes, all right. Well, sure. No, but the funny thing about it is, I was reading yesterday a sleep story. Right, there's one sleep story in every newspaper in America at least once a week, right, about what you're supposed to do and all that. And this was in the Journal, and it was basically why you shouldn't get up at 5 a.m. because basically, if it doesn't sync with your chronotype, it's going to wreck you more than help you. But what struck me as interesting as part of the article was the correlation between stress and sleep, which in a Gallup poll from April of 24 was the first time that 57% of Americans reported they'd feel better if they got more sleep, and it correlated very closely with stress. So basically, which I guess all makes sense, right? But a couple of things stood out. One, in 1942, 59% of Americans said they got 8 or more hours of sleep.
Let's go back to that.
Can you imagine just what that, I don't know what that world would have been like. But, so then I started looking into sleep health studies, and I will leave you with this. First of all, 70% of people say that stress is what prevents them from falling asleep. So it's not just physiological. It's basically the ruminations that are going on in the brain. And so I wonder whether we all know about, you're not supposed to look at your phones and have blue light, but I wonder if it's obviously there's some, blue light messes with your melatonin, but I'm sure what you're reading when you're staying awake on your phone is not helping either. I mean, rarely do people turn off their phone and go, I've just had a really pleasant experience. It's usually they're like, I need to get off of this thing. But the final point is this: stress rising for Americans over the past 3 decades. It's a line that goes from 1994, kind of 40% say they frequently experience stress. In 2001, you know what happens? It drops precipitously to like the low 30s. And then it slowly climbs, and at the, starting at the Great Recession in 2007, it starts to really pick up, and then, it's really picked up now. But I was fascinated by the drop, the serious divot that comes after 2001. And the biggest event around then was the attacks of 9/11. So I don't know, make of it what you will. Discuss at your cocktail party whether and why that might be the case. But that interested me.
How many hours of sleep do you guys get? I get 8. I get like more than 8.
Good for you.
It's made my life a lot better.
Are you counting actual sleep or the amount of time that you're like in your bed?
Really actual sleep. I usually am close my eyes and I'm pretty quickly asleep around 10:30, and I get up 6:30.
That's great. I wake up in the middle of the night at least once, usually twice, sometimes multiple times, sometimes for hours, and that's making it hard for me to get 8 hours of sleep. But then some nights I do get 8 hours of sleep. It is definitely stress related, but it's not only stress related, I have to say. It's also age related.
Yes. I mean, controlling for alcohol consumption and all of that. According to all the devices I wear that measure my sleep, I get somewhere between 7 and 8 hours. But then, of course, sometimes, like last night was an absolute dog's breakfast. I probably got like 4 hours of sleep. I don't know why. I wasn't particularly stressed. I just woke up and couldn't figure out how to get back to sleep. So
Me too.
Yeah. And I thought, how is this going to affect me on the Slate Political Gabfest?
Well, that's the problem with waking up in the middle of the night is I spend time berating myself and feeling incredibly frustrated that I'm not asleep.
Yeah, you do that. And then at some point, the path to wisdom is to just be awake. Like today, that was for me today. And I was like, at 5:30, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to get up.
Well, I felt that way at 4. But then I was like, by the time I get to the taping time, I'm going to be just a puddle of goo. But I do love the idea of the sort of the Middle Ages, the way they slept, right? Which is this periodic fashion. So you go to sleep when the sun goes down, and then like in the middle of the night, you wake up and you do a bunch of stuff, which is also in its nature quiet, mellow stuff, which is like reading and like needlework or something, needlepoint, and but perhaps an etching, and then you're back to bed.
I do not believe that is one of these things which I just don't believe. No matter how many historians have said it,
you don't believe they did it.
I just don't believe they did it. I just think that
you're in the pocket of big mattress.
Also, would have been so cold, and they had to make a fire. I mean, it just seems like they had to do a lot of work to be up in the middle of the night. They couldn't just turn on the light, and they certainly couldn't just flick on their
needlework
iPad
by
and
candle.
read something.
Yeah. All right, my chatter is I had a funny experience with OpenAI this week where I was trying to, for something at work, I was trying to get it to create, I was imagining a fictional city which I called Gotham in the spirit of fictional cities. And I was trying to get it to create bat-themed Gotham images. Didn't mention Batman, nothing about the Batman universe, just bats. And OpenAI was so leery of violating the IP rights of DC Comics that it just wouldn't do anything. It just was like, can't do that.
There are no bats that are not Batman copyrighted.
But when you're done,
they'll take all the clothes off of the bat.
Yes, that was the thing that I was like, oh yeah, but if you take a real person, take a real human being, and you want to take a photo of a real human being, go ahead, strip them naked, cover them in semen. That's okay. But no, if you have something that's
just because I'm just hewing to David's earlier point, which is that the owner's map to the to the artificial intelligence, and it's Grok where they take all their clothes off.
I know, but I bet if you went to Grok and asked them to create bat-themed images for Gotham, they would also be like, nope, sorry, can't
probably
do
not.
it.
But that is because
can't do it, guys.
I touched DC Comics once when I was writing Hardest Job, and there's a great cartoon. Superman runs for president in one DC comic, and so it was the perfect thing I needed for my idea that we create this superhero image of the presidency. This is before Donald Trump second term, in which all kinds of different things happen. But I tried to use the picture, pay for it and everything, Oh my God, DC Comics was so not into it. I mean, they didn't just say, thanks for asking, but no, they were like, klaxons started found. I thought Superman himself was going to come and keep me from doing it.
Maybe he would have, and maybe he should have.
Listeners, please keep your great cocktail chatters coming to us at gabfest@slate.com. Email us, please, whatever it is you are cocktail chattering about. We have a lovely cocktail chatter from Stefan in San Francisco.
Hi, Slate Gabfest. This is Stefan from San Francisco. My chatter today is a San Francisco Chronicle article about the closing of Café Jacqueline. Café Jacqueline has been open in North Beach for nearly 50 years. It's a charming, elegant, and relaxed restaurant. They served a couple soups, a few salads, and an incredible menu of traditional savory and dessert soufflés. For that whole time, Jacqueline Margulis has worked the kitchen by herself, preparing every soufflé to order. It goes into the oven just as you finish your last course. It's a relaxed delight for friends, romances, and celebrations. Jacqueline is 90 now, and it's time for her to put down her whisk. We bid her a fond adieu.
Wow, love.
Apparently there are these huge piles of eggs in the restaurant. Like that she would just go through egg after egg after egg. And if she wasn't there, the restaurant was not open.
Can I just admit to something that is, I have a little more free time now, and so I'm I am incapable of, and have been for a long time, and I make a lot of them. I'm incapable of cracking an egg elegantly. It's always a mess. There's shell in there.
Like shell gets in there, huh?
The shell gets in there. I overdo it. I underdo it. The notion that people can crack eggs with one hand with a sort of flourish while they're mixing a Boulevardier cocktail with the other hand, to me, is one of the great acts of just genius in the world, which is why when Stanley Tucci does it in Big Night, it's very winning.
We'll check back in with you in a week, John, and your weird behavior will have become such that you now have a souffle restaurant.
Yes,
you're operating. That is all for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about the argument at the Supreme Court over bans on transgender athletes in sports. And however, that is only for Slate Plus members, who also get lots of great stuff for their subscription. Bonus episodes on other Slate podcasts, discounts to live shows like our live show coming up in DC, not hitting the paywall on the Slate site. So if you are a member, thank you. Enjoy it. If you're not a member, subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus. That's our show for today. The Political Gabfest is produced by Nina Porzucki. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond, Senior Director for Podcast Operations. Mia Lobel is Executive Producer for Slate Podcasts. And Hillary Fry is the Editor-in-Chief of Slate. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Go to our live show in DC. Come to our live show in DC on February 11th, Wednesday. Slate.com/GabfestLive DC.